Cici, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Just to kick off, in case any listeners haven't come across you just yet, would you be able to kind of outline your humble beginnings, wherever they were, and kind of bring us up to the current day of coaching and what you've done along the way?
Yeah, 100%. So my name is Cici Murray. I am a speed coach. I work with Les Spellman and Spellman Performance. We are kind of based out in Southern California. We have a couple coaches in San Diego, a couple in Orange County. And that's kind of how I really got connected with the team. I kind of started in physical therapy, so I worked in a physical therapy office pretty much all throughout college, and gained a lot of useful experience there, and a lot of my time management skills and just organization skills definitely come from that, and my baseline and knowing the body and know how the body moves in space and that kind of thing. But I think I just always knew that physical therapy just wasn't my speed. I always just wanted something fast paced and high stress, as crazy as it sounds, but I think I work better in that environment. Um, so at that office, I just kind of connected a lot with the athletes, and a lot specifically with the football players there, and I just kind of started going to their practices and talking to their coaches, and just kind of being around and sitting in on some of their practices and things like that. And I eventually kind of got an opportunity to coach my own 7-on-7. So I was a part of a 7-on-7 organization, and that's where kind of like my football niche took me. So I was kind of head down in that, and I enjoyed it so much, and loved what I was doing with that. So I knew that that was, more my path. And I happened to be, working with an NFL guy who I met his speed coach when I was working with him, and just so happens that we connected afterwards, and he was like, "Hey, I love your work. I love what you do. Let me know, if you ever want to connect in the future and work." And so that's kind of where I got started. And he was like, "Hey, I know you haven't done a lot of speed, but your work ethic is unmatched, and I would love to just kind of have you learn and progress with the team." And so I did. I saw that vision pretty early on, and speed is, I still feel like it's fairly new. Like for me, I was a mediocre athlete in high school, and speed was never really a thing. There wasn't really speed training when I was in high school. So there's been a lot of research to be done, a lot of learning to be done, a lot of bad reps to be made. But I think that all that has kind of given me a lot more confidence now in my coaching, and just kind of the journey that I've taken, because it's been far from linear, but it's definitely been rewarding for sure.
And what's like a typical day or week? What are your kind of like day to day coaching activities like at the moment?
Yeah. So a lot of our, consulting clients are high school teams. So they bring us on for a certain training block, and we'll come in, once or twice a week, work with the team, generally for like 8 to 12 weeks. So usually once a week, I'm at different schools, or different soccer clubs. I have some private training clients as well, that is kind of a mixture of like elite high school kids and like college commits. So a fairly diverse group, and different sports that I work with, and different athletes that I work with. And that's been a really cool process also, because like I said, kind of coming into from the football lane and just kind of expanding into different sports has been a really great experience for me.
Yeah. We spoke last week before we did this episode, and one of the things we were talking about was the universal speed rating that you're involved in. Can we dive straight in, and can you talk us through what that is and kind of why coaches should be aware of it?
Yeah. Yeah, so, during COVID, it was like we couldn't find any field to work on. We were getting kicked off of fields. We were getting the cops called on us if we would try to get on a field. And so we were like, well, we're sitting around like, what are we going to do? We still got to work. So we were trying to think about what can we do as coaches to make sure and, provide value if we're not able to coach in person. So we kind of created the universal speed rating as, one, a programming tool, but also a speed tracking journey. So any athlete can go and, submit their time into the universal speed rating, or they can get tested at one of our partner facilities, and then get a verified score. So we really wanted to make it, an encompassing and, inclusive platform for coaches and for athletes to not only track their journey, but be able to compete and have that factor. And, if a kid was in Hawaii and didn't have those resources, that they would still be able to train like we're training out here, and be able to do it wherever they're at.
Very cool. That's very cool. And then we'll get into some like nitty gritty technical speed stuff shortly, but I know you're also doing something called More Her Speed. Do you want to talk us through what that is? Because I think that'll probably lead us into like one of the big topics that we want to talk about today.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of, been my idea and my project for a while. With More Her Speed, I think that the main goal originally was just kind of to get exposure on the board and put other women on the map. There's been a lot of needed progress for women in this field for a long time, but it's not always easy to find. So I wanted to give credit where it was due and be able to highlight different women in different areas of sport and really just be able to share resources. So to start, I kind of launched it as a weekly newsletter. That one isn't specific or isn't exclusive to women. It could be anyone, man, woman, adult, child, whatever. But I do include a monthly female spotlight. So from that, I was getting a lot of really good feedback, and I was getting so many questions and emails and DMs just kind of relating to my journey and how I got to where I was. And I just realized, like, if there are this many coaches or aspiring coaches that have the same kind of questions, it would be a disservice to not share some of that knowledge with a larger group. So from the newsletter, I created a membership of all women in sports, where we kind of have a shared platform to just connect and share ideas and questions and struggles. And it's been really rewarding to watch people connect, even outside of me. So, I don't I don't have all the answers. So I think that adding women from different backgrounds, whether that's strength or, sport specific coaches, or, even agents or internal business women, was really important, because it can just give a lot better perspective to their experiences. So, I didn't create it just for women who are already established and successful in their field. I really did it for women that are also just passionate in the space, or for interns that may not know exactly what direction they want to take, but they know that this is where they want to be. And to be honest, I really did it because I wish I had something like it when I had first gotten started. I didn't really have any of that raw transparency and honesty about really what this profession would be like, and how hard it can be at times. And I think that if I had a network of resources like this, 5 years ago when I was getting started, then it probably would have saved me a lot of doubt and a lot of backpedaling trying to decide if I could make it through or not.
What were your expectations? This is something that as a guy I never had to think about, and I know plenty of women that work in sport, but equally I've met people along the way who work in gyms or work in teams, maybe at schools or something, but they don't think they can necessarily get into like the big teams, or they don't think they can carve a niche into professional sport. They think there's going to be too many barriers. What was your kind of experience of that, or your expectations?
There is a lot of barriers, and I think that it's harder. It was obviously harder for women. I think that I came into it with no expectations, to be honest. I came into it, and there wasn't a lot of women doing it. And there still isn't a lot, but there's more. But, 5 or 6 years ago, I couldn't find a good enough resource that I could trust in and that I could find value in to lead me in the right direction. I kind of really went into it blind. I happened to just connect with the right people and connected with people that trusted in me and believed in me and put their faith in me enough to know that I was always down to put in the work, and I was always down to grind it out no matter what that meant. And starting in physical therapy and kind of transitioning, I think it was a smooth transition, just because I was already kind of involved in that space, not directly with a more high performance sector, but I just was around sports a lot and around coaches a lot. And so, when coaches started considering like, hey, who should we bring on for this position? I was one of those looks. And I think that really just making yourself present and known and resourceful and just asking the right questions was my biggest foot in the door, because I think that that's what people are scared to do. I think people are scared to ask questions and are scared to not know, and are scared to be wrong. And I never was. I was never scared to be wrong. I was never scared to fail, because I knew that I would continue to fail, and I still continue to fail all the time. So I think that that's a major barrier, is being afraid to fail. And for the most part, I'm just not, because I've failed a lot, and I know what it feels like, and I know what it looks like. So moving forward, I feel like that's one thing that I continue to do, is I continue to learn. And that's the best thing that coaches can do as well, is just kind of continue to learn and always be teachable and coachable. And, like I said, just networking and being yourself and being around the right people was huge for me.
And actually, a lot of what you're saying there, we kind of went into that from a gender perspective, but actually, that's kind of universal. I think everyone that's trying to get in has to be the squeaky wheel. I think that's the saying. But everyone has to kind of be resourceful and be hungry, talk to people, be very sincere about wanting to help people, and you need that drive and hunger early on, especially. You now work with a lot of NFL players, and from a sport perspective, that's an incredibly male-dominated sport, both from obviously a player, but also a staff perspective. You've got a good reputation as a coach, but I'm wondering kind of how was it earlier on, like with your first few, pro male athletes? How did it go in terms of like respect, rapport, confidence, as someone who hasn't played in the NFL, or played collegiate football or something? The things that they're used to with their, maybe their male strength coaches or the people they usually deal with.
I think a lot of my confidence honestly comes from getting thrown in the fire and figuring my way out. I think the first year that I really started working with combine athletes and with NFL players, I really was, like you said, I just was resourceful. That was it. That was all I was there to do, really. I was there to stretch anybody if needed. I was there to do recovery if needed. I was there to set up and break down and answer questions and ask questions and monitor readiness. And I really just kind of, that year that I spent was so crucial, because that's where I learned to build my best relationships. And so starting off of that first year, once I, continued on off season after off season after off season, these guys continue to see me progress and see me stick around. We've had a bunch of interns that the schedule is just really, really hard for them, and it's tough, and a lot of them, can't keep that pressure, and I understand that. But I think that them seeing me year after year and continue to grow my responsibilities and grow my role to the point where now I run NFL off-season groups by myself. There was no question, or there was no lack of respect when it got to that point, because they saw the work that I put in the previous years. And when I come across new clients, it's funny. My my NFL guys and my collegiate guys are my easiest group to work with. There usually isn't a lack of respect, due to I probably wouldn't be in that position and running that group by myself if I wasn't deserved to be there. So that's
Yeah.
not really, my problem group or anything like that. But I think that knowing the line between when to be professional, when to joke around, when to lay the hammer down, when to, make jokes and do all that. It really just comes down to reading the room. And I have a very good gauge for when I can joke around and when I need to be professional. And think that coming into this, I told myself, there's lines that I just can't cross and that I won't cross working in this field. And I picked that side, and I picked the side of being professional and of, maintaining my image and maintaining my role, that I never wanted to falter from that. And, that comes with its own struggles for sure. But once I decided that, there was really no looking back. I knew that, I had to put myself in a position to where they were going to respect me, or nobody was going to take me seriously.
Let's get into some speed stuff. This podcast is way overdue having a good speed person like yourself on. So let's get into some of the kind of technical aspects. When you're working, whether it's football or any other sport or sprinters, whatever the kind of speed-based athlete is, when you're working with them, how do you personally approach kind of assessing them in terms of technical or physical needs? And
Yeah,
you can answer this as one big, long, two-part answer if it's easier.
that's a good question. So obviously, those are two kind of not separate things. They do coincide, but from the physical side, it's truthfully pretty rare for an athlete to have a completely sound physical base, especially when working with a younger population, for example. There are going to be some athletes that may just need to get stronger. But generally speaking, athletes will fall into either a more force-based bucket or a more velocity-based bucket. And within that, we can kind of, look at where that force is generated from a physical or a technical perspective. So we can do that through assessment, like you said, with a force velocity profile. So that's going to look at the properties and the actual breakdown of the sprint itself and the athlete's ability to produce force and in what direction. So horizontal force versus vertical force, and looking at that, from acceleration all the way up into velocity. So once we have that down, from a programming standpoint, we can kind of attack, those individual prescriptions and programming with a load velocity profile. So that's another assessment that we do that'll basically determine the athlete's optimal training load. So, an athlete is only hitting their peak power output for a very short period of time, a fraction of a second of their run. So if we can hone in and determine that load for that individual athlete, then we can, target that output for a longer period of time. So even if you have two athletes who have the same body weight, or, even two athletes that run the same speed, a load velocity profile is going to determine if the individual athlete has a higher acceleration or a higher velocity rate, and then can be kind of trained accordingly, depending on which bucket that they fall into. So then, and then on the technical side, I think that a lot of people look at speed through a very technical lens at first. And though that's obviously a very important piece of our model, as far as programming a session, you can't attack 5 technical aspects at a time. If you've trained athletes, you'll learn quickly that over cueing them and giving them multiple pieces to think about at one time, it's just too much stimulus for them. So if you determine a technical piece to attack and focus on that emphasis, for the day or for the week or, for that training session, then it's going to simplify the response a lot for the athlete. So whether that be projection or ground contact times or switching or, whatever performance indicator that that you want to target, you can then kind of hone in a little bit more on the technical drilling.
Yeah, you mentioned kind of profiling them via force velocity. When you're looking at like a technical aspect, that can sometimes be, the reason for why you see what you see technically could also be, like a local capacity thing in a certain muscle or around a certain joint. Do you guys profile local to certain joints as well? So moving away from the force velocity, like plyo driven tests, do you go into like your high force ISO tests and more like localized tests? Not with everybody, but when you see that kind of maybe anatomically driven technical thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I know you wanted to talk a little bit about tech, which brings up a great point. We we have utilized the force plates a lot. So we use force plates from Hawken Dynamics to kind of focus on the force output scale, and we kind of experimented a lot with our NFL offseason guys and our NFL Combine guys this year. We used a lot of Alex Natera's work on his ISO testing. And basically it kind of, mimics the positions that you're going to be in running and, related to sprinting, what kind of ISOs that we can look at and how much force is being generated at each of those joints. So we used, a hip ISO test. We used a knee, an ankle. We used a mid thigh pull. And that gave us a lot of really good insight for what areas they might be weak at, or where their imbalances might be, or where they may have had an injury that might be, holding them back technically. So that gave us a lot of really good feedback on that side. And then, we pre and post tested to see what changed. And so that was a really good metric for us to use. So ISOs have been really key for us, and definitely kind of tapping into that technical side.
Obviously, like symmetry is easy for everybody to grasp, why you would look at that. But everybody always wants to know the kind of key metrics that you look at. So I'm gonna ask you the most annoying question in the world of like, is there any kind of key standards anywhere, whether that's force velocity, strength? Is there standards that you're looking for that for you are more meaningful? I'm going to get asked, if I don't ask you this question, why I didn't. So I have to ask you the metric question. But is there standards that you look at essentially?
There's a lot of standards. Yeah. I think it depends on the group that we're working with and what's the most meaningful, and what we can even have the power to manipulate. So we look a lot, obviously, at ground contact time, at air time. We look at both of those in acceleration and in max velocity. We're going to look at thigh angular velocity. We're going to look at they're obviously their peak speed reached. So their peak speed in 10 yards versus that later 10, so that we're getting some insight to their acceleration capabilities and their max velocity capabilities. So again, I think it's dependent on the group and the athlete. And, realistically for a younger population or, non-elite level clients, not that they're any less important, but there's going to be less of the technical aspect and more of really just getting that stimulus in for them. And I get asked all the time, what's the easiest way to run faster? And I'll tell them straight up, you run fast more often. And that I think proves true a lot for some of that younger population, and ones that it's going to be a little bit harder to manipulate technically, because a lot of those athletes are going to need to develop, a strength base. So there's tons of metrics that we look at, and whether that's in relation to sprinting or even into, injury risk assessment and those kind of things. So dependent on our goal, we're going to look at different metrics for sure.
Obviously, like, you could look at sprinters as being in different phenotypes as to whether they're like, big high force producers, more elastic, the style of sprinting, if you kind of say that. Is there minimum standards that you ever want in any tests, or is the testing more this monitoring piece for you assessing your programming? And did the program that you set out to give the athlete, did it change the metric that you want? You see what I mean? Like people sometimes want the, what's the lowest score you'd want for this, or what do you expect here, beyond just looking at whether your program changed accordingly.
Yeah, I think it's both. I think when you have a certain training block, like for example, if I'm going to a high school for 8 weeks, or if I'm going and training NFL combine athletes for 8 weeks, if I take my combine group specifically, I only have 8 weeks to manipulate some of these metrics. And, so that's why initial assessment, it is important. And that's why continuing and monitoring assessment is even more important. So we test all the time without the athlete even knowing it, even just down to like a daily readiness or a CMJ or something that they don't realize is necessarily a test, but we're going to use it kind of, one, to see where they're at maybe on a readiness scale, and that's going to manipulate our programming. And two, to just kind of see how far away they are from their norm. So when we get down to like the last couple weeks, but right before leading up to combine, if they're not hitting, even just in their CMJ, if they're not hitting, 90% of their max jump height, then we're going to change their program completely. I think some of these cases are time sensitive and case sensitive, and is going to change by case to case basis. So what I do if I have a group for an entire year is going to be a lot different from what I do with a group for 8 weeks. So, where if I'm focused on an athlete hitting certain ground contact times to, make them run a better 40, and that is my goal, then that's going to change my program and my prescription a little bit than if I'm working with a group all year round.
Yeah. We mentioned tech briefly. You referenced kind of force plates. Is there what other kind of toys in the toy chest do you guys use tech wise with speed athletes?
Yeah. I think we've been really fortunate to have experimented and been exposed to a lot of different tech and hardware, because it is incredibly useful. When we were first starting out, we used to literally and manually write out what our intended volume was for each session and track it by hand. So utilizing tech like GPS or lasers has obviously been a huge factor into one, our assessment, and also, like I said, our monitoring. So for most of our testing processes, using GPS or lasers to give us a baseline for where athletes are at, and then be able to kind of track that journey is huge. So not only for their journey itself, but just like you said, to kind of see the success of the program and see what works and what didn't. It's also a good tool for competition, particularly with younger athletes. Them, seeing lasers set up or having a GPS on and knowing that they ran faster than their teammate is a great buy-in process for a coach as well, and makes it, a more gamified experience for the athletes. So I think dependent on the athlete or group, we might put on GPS for maybe the entire session, and use metrics that are going to be more indicative of what they're going to be experiencing, during game. So our goal isn't just to have an athlete run faster for our hour-long session, but how they can actually play faster in the game. So, using player load metrics and, number of accelerations and decelerations and things like that, that can give us a little more insight to what they need to be working on to actually play faster in competition. And I also think I
think that's pretty parallel to the gym, isn't it? Sorry.
Oh no, you're good.
I think it's pretty parallel to the gym, because in the gym you always hear strength coaches, more pragmatically saying you don't need to turn a player into a weightlifter. The weightlifting is for performance and injury changes. It's the same with speed, isn't it? Like, you don't want to just create the world's most perfect sprinter and an NFL player. They need to be able to play the game and repeat their sprints. So. Sorry, I cut into you. What were you saying?
Oh no, I was gonna touch on just what we had talked about earlier. Outside of GPS and lasers, because those are great, and I think that especially when working with athletes who are coming to you to get faster, there is a huge power in something that you can give them, and data that you can give them, and progress that you can give them, so that they can get a gauge, and so that you can get a gauge as well. But we've utilized a huge amount of data, like I said, from the force plates with Hawkins, and hardware like Output Sports, just to give us some insight, for where they're at from a force output perspective, and how that obviously relates to sprinting, as well as all the monitoring. So, I think that there's, of course, pieces that, you can get away with not being absolutely necessary to your program, but it has definitely helped us and given us a lot more feedback to influence our training prescriptions, for sure.
I'm curious, is there any parts of your job with speed athletes that you're still chipping away at very manually with pen and paper? Is there any, obviously, VBT, force plates, lasers, GPS has made a huge difference. Is there anything that you're stuck doing on pen and paper?
I'm always right. I feel like I'm always writing something down. And mostly that comes from my own personal, just kind of continued education. And, if I see something in a session, like I always have a little notebook on me. And I keep that with me for every session. And so sometimes I might, mid session pull it out and just write down something that I make sure that I want to look into later, or I make sure that I want to ask the athlete about later. So I would say that, like, pen and paper, the only like testing or assessment stuff that I'm writing down is, if they're running through lasers or running GPS, then I'll write down their speeds so that they can go and look at it. But pen and paper has mostly just become note taking more than anything now, because we do have amazing technology that has been able to help us, and we can export all that data, and or using stuff, equipment like 1080. The 1080 Sprint is incredible, and that stores all your information for you. Most of the tech that we use stores all that data for you, and then that's, I think, where a lot of the coaches don't know or are unfamiliar with what to do with it from there. It's like, okay, well, now that we have this data, what do we do with it? So that's where, we kind of come up with our own processes of, hey, there's 1,000 metrics that you can take from most of these GPS units, but what's actually important? And, what's the deliverable back to the athlete that makes it easily digestible for them?
Yeah, no, the reason I ask, and I really agree with you, is we had a recent episode with Raf Brandon, and he was talking about, it's great to collect data, but data needs context. And I think, even the data points that you collect on any given day, there's a context behind it. If they're feeling great and their scores look good, that's context. If they don't feel as good, or something's sore, or they've got DOMs, or they're stiff, or whatever the kind of change in quality is, there's a context behind the data, especially when you look at that data, weeks or months down the line, and you look at the backlog. Just looking at the numbers in their raw form is, it's tough to get the full picture if you haven't made those notes and you haven't got that qualitative kind of story behind it at the same time.
Yeah, we even with a couple of our athletes, we'll do, like a daily wellness questionnaire in the morning before training, and that, like I said, will give us an insight to what that day's program will look like. If everybody's, on a 10% fatigue score and readiness score, then we're not going to run max velocity on every guy. And then, just kind of like you said, just collecting that data over time, you're able to compare it to other metrics, like, hey, when their fatigue score was the best, when their readiness score was the best, that's when they ran the fastest, that's when they jumped the highest. So it's good to make those correlations and have, some actual data to back that, just so that, and it's important to share with the athlete as well. We told them, hey, it's not fun especially when you get, to elite level. These guys don't want to fill out a 10 question questionnaire every morning. They think that they have better stuff to do. So I think that when you can show them, like, hey, we were doing this for a reason, and on this day you felt the best, you ran the fastest, and you jumped the highest, and like I said, I think it builds more trust in your program and your processes when you can kind of show them some of that data.
Yeah, for sure. I'm aware of time, but one thing I really wanted to squeeze in was, and we only kind of touched upon this when we first connected, was, beyond, you know, breaking into fields and tracks and places where you can run athletes. You were telling me about how early some of your athletes will turn up to these running spaces. Can you talk us through kind of your, give us the backlog of this story in terms of like the athletes that are training at these crazy times and why they do it for you? Because I thought it was a great story.
Yes, that would be my loyal 5 a.m. group. I really had just a crazy idea to just work out by myself at 5 a.m. one morning. And it happened that the night before, one of our trainings with one of my groups got canceled because of the rain. So they had missed that session, and I was going to work out the next morning anyway at 5 a.m. So in my head, I'm like, let me just tell these kids that they need to come, and that's they're going to be their second session for the week. And I didn't phrase it to where I necessarily gave them a choice, but I called, these 10 kids at 9:30 at night and told them to pull up to the field the next day at 5 a.m. and all of them showed up. And these are high school kids that woke up at 4 a.m. to get there. So I think from there it was cold, it was dark, it was early, it was not fun, and it ended up being everyone's favorite session. It has been that first session at 5 a.m. with that group. It was, one of my favorite sessions to date. And now it has become like everybody's favorite session of the week. And that's a session that none of those kids miss, as crazy as it sounds. But I think that it has created such a good culture between me and them and between each other. I think that it's been so dope to watch some of these athletes that don't know each other and don't go to the same school, and some of them don't even play the same sport, to come together. And now they're such good friends, and they love training with each other, and they love training with me. And it has shown me and given me a lot of confidence, because they are my most loyal group. It has been the most fulfilling group of my entire career, up to this point, because they are so bought in that it doesn't matter if people tell them that they're crazy for training with a girl, or people tell them that they're crazy for training at 5 a.m., or if somebody else tries to get them to do a speed workout that isn't mine, they just won't do it. And to me, that has put a lot of faith in me as a coach, and just my relationship building with them.
What do you the $1 million question is, what do you think is the biggest factor or factors that has enabled you to get teenage athletes out of bed for a 5 a.m. session? Because that's, as good a story as it is, that's no mean feat, and there's a reason behind that. What do you think are the key things that are getting them up? And, how have you done that, essentially? Because there'll be people listening thinking, how has she done that? How do you get athletes that early at that age range?
Making the session a good time, as best as I can for those conditions. I can talk about this a little bit later, as far as just kind of building those relationships. But I think that it's important to be relatable to athletes. I think that there is, a fine line between being an athlete's friend and being an athlete's coach. And I'm not there to be their friend, but I also do want to make it an experience that they're going to learn, they're going to get better, they're not going to get hurt, and they're going to have fun. So as long as I can hit all those boxes, and make the session worthwhile for me, for them, and for their progress, and just kind of their betterment as an athlete, then I think that the proof is kind of there already. They see their improvements, and they know that depending on that work that they put in, that they're going to get better. Then there's nothing I can't tell them at this point that they won't do.
I was going to say I'm really aware of time with this episode, but where's the best place for people to find you? Obviously, undisclosed locations for tracks at 5 a.m, but in terms of online and your normal activities, where can people find you?
Yeah, my Instagram is Cici Murray _ I believe. My Twitter is Cici Murray. I can send out the newsletter link. I have my newsletter that goes out every single Tuesday. Like I said, Instagram, Twitter, email, best way to reach me. I'm doing my best to get better at social media. So any of those I will usually get to. And yeah, I'm always down to connect and network. I think that it has been so powerful, and that has been, one of my biggest tools is connecting with good people, and people putting me in good positions, and likewise me putting them in good positions. So I'm always down to connect for sure.
Is there anything coming up further down the road that you guys have coming up, or you have coming up, that you want to draw people's attention to? Is there anything we can do, spoiler alerts or plugs for, before you get out of here?
There's a lot in the works for the whole team. I think that putting everyone on a team and putting each individual person on is huge. So we are all under Spellman Performance, but we all have our own courses. We all do. I have my membership. JP has his deceleration courses. We all have courses that we kind of work together on. So definitely more educational courses. I will have a good amount of announcements coming out on the more her speed side, as far as events and things like that. And yeah, just that's our main goal as a company and as a team is, we put out free game all day, every day on social media. That's all we do. So I think that, us holding information in would be a disservice, and I think that everybody eats. So yeah, we're always trying to put out new information.
Cool. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to get to know you on the show and talk last week as well. So thank you. Thanks for giving up your time today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Cool.